What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Monday, May 14th, 2018, almost halfway through the month here. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments and questions here. So let's just get right on into it because we do have a lot of stuff to cover. Obviously, today is the Nakba Day, the catastrophe, or if you're on the other side, the 70th anniversary of the creation of the state of Israel. A lot of protests, something like 35,000 protesters protesting the move of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv, which is still officially Israel's capital, to Jerusalem. And needless to say, down in Gaza, there's a huge protest going on down there as well by the border fence. And the IDF are they're just shooting huge numbers of people. And apparently there's something like 54 people have been killed just today only, and 1,300 have been wounded. And Israel is still taking the position that these peaceful protesters represent an enemy in a war against Israel's borders. So that's their justification, and because it's a war, humanitarian law should not have to apply. Well, there are rules of war, including the kinds of ammunition you're allowed to use on the enemy, and those expanding butterfly bullets are definitely not allowed. So even Israel's excuse for why they're doing what they're doing, they're still in violation of various laws and rules, because they don't care. They don't care. Now, Trump didn't make it to the embassy opening himself, but he did send Ivanka and Jared Kushner, who got on up there and said the usual things to make Israel happy, that Israel has a right to protect their borders, which is kind of amazing because Israel has never officially drawn their borders. Israel's borders are written in dry erase marker so that they can be moved quickly when Israel grabs pieces of other people's countries, which, if you have studied the history of Israel, they're constantly trying to grab pieces of other people's countries. The Sinai, Lebanon, Syria, obviously the West Bank, so forth and so on. Okay, now, little video did come on out from Gaza, despite heavy interference from the Israeli army, and Israeli drones were filmed dropping incendiary devices on the tents housing the protesters. And the video I saw, it looked to me like it was white phosphorus, which again is banned for use on civilians. In fact, its only legal use in warfare is as a smoke screen. You're not supposed to drop it on buildings. You're not supposed to drop it on people. Meanwhile, in order to prevent more videos and photos from getting out of Gaza, the army is jamming all the cell phone systems in Gaza. They're just trying to keep this stuff from getting on out. And so they're basically trying to lock down the cellular networks here. Now, one of the people who got shot is Aiea Assad al-Swafari, 26-year-old peaceful demonstrator, and she was shot by an Israeli sniper. And the irony of this is because Israel won the Eurovision competition with a song that claimed to advocate for women's rights. So a little touch of irony there. They're singing about women's rights at the Eurovision, and then they turn around and they shoot women in Gaza for peacefully protesting. I guess women's rights doesn't apply to the Palestinians, only to the chosen ones. It's our rights, not yours. Our rights we're celebrating here. So basically, we're looking at the situation, and it is escalating because along with the move of the embassy and along with the atrocities along the border with Gaza, apparently a bunch of settlers stormed the Temple Mount and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And so there's fighting going on there. And of course, yesterday, Israel fired over 20 missiles into the Gaza Strip just to prove that they could do it. So Israel is really pushing. I think Netanyahu wants a third intifada that he can use to terrorize the Israeli people into more obedience, as if the threat of war with Syria and Russia wasn't enough to do it. Anyway, Norman Finkelstein is out there talking about crimes against humanity committed by Israel against the Palestinian people. And he's saying, where is the solidarity for Gaza? Everyone's always talking about solidarity with Israel or solidarity with these people, solidarity with that people. How about solidarity for the Palestinians? Because all they're protesting for is their promised right to return to their homes that were taken from them during the creation of the State of Israel. And the United Nations has passed resolutions saying the Palestinians have a right of return. In fact, Israel's membership at the United Nations carries with it a condition of a Palestinian right of return. And I think, given what is going on down at the border of Gaza and Al-Aqsa Mosque, it's time for the United Nations to kick Israel out, because they have not complied with the conditions placed on its membership. There were two: the right of return, and then if the Palestinians of their own free will chose not to return to their homes, Israel would financially compensate them for the properties. Israel has complied with neither one. And this has been going on for 70 years. 70 years. And because of Israel's lock on all these Western governments and the corporate media, everybody just looks the other way. If this were a mirror situation, if the Palestinians were just gunning down Israelis at random, imagine the reaction you would see, both from the U.S. government and the U.S. corporate media. It's a massacre. It's horrific. It's the beginning of a new Holocaust. But because it's Israel versus Palestine, nope, no story here. Don't need to worry about that. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. But the reality is there is a dark side of Israel's independence. And Israel was basically built on one of the biggest lies of history, that Palestine was a land without a people for a people without a land. And that is absolutely not true. Palestine has been continuously occupied for 2,000 years. There was a thriving culture when Israel started to come on in and carve sections of it off. They did mostly agricultural exports. They had their own music. They had their own arts. They were world-renowned for their embroidery. They had their own coinage. I got a whole bunch of stuff people have sent me over the years. Artifacts of Palestine. There was a people in Palestine, and they've been displaced. And they were promised a right to return to their homes, and that's what these protests are all about. They just want what was theirs. That's it. Now, turning on over to Syria, apparently the battle for southern Damascus is entering what is hopefully being described as its final phase. And the cities of Beit Sam, Babila, Sida, Magdad, and Yelda in southern Damascus have basically been liberated. And forces are now looking at combating ISIS in the Yarmouk refugee camp, Tagadom, and in the northern part of Al-Hajar al-Aswad. And the Syrian Arab Army, the Palestinian Liberation Army, and other pro-government factions have liberated the Educational Development Center, the Assad bin al-Furat School, the United Nations Relief Welfare Agency School, the Jazeera roundabout, and multiple nearby points in Al-Haraj al-Aswad from ISIS. Currently, the main clashes between government troops and ISIS members are going on near the town hall. Meanwhile, the Syrian Air Force has stepped up its bombing campaign against the remaining ISIS fortifications in the area. Now, according to the ISIS-linked news agency Amaq, 38 Syrian Arab Army soldiers have recently died in the clashes in southern Damascus. This is all but over. Assad has won. Unless the U.S. does another false flag chemical weapon attack and just goes on in again, which we cannot possibly rule out. Meanwhile, as part of the deal with Syrian authorities, militants who are now leaving the battle area are surrendering their medium and heavy weapons. Apparently, they're being allowed to take their light weapons with them. And among all these medium and heavy weapons, they're finding huge amounts of Israeli-made weapons. And that may explain why ISIS and Al-Qaeda never attacked Israel, even though they're supposed to be these dangerous Islamic terrorists. And I'd like to make a little point here. If Israel has so many weapons that it can hand them out willy-nilly to terrorist groups, why do they need more weapons from us? Just something to think about. Meanwhile, the corporate media is out there just attacking and smearing any dissenting Syria narratives, and they really don't have an argument. So it's personal attacks, ad hominem attacks, and no less than 7 smear pieces were issued by prominent publications in a single day. You know, how can you doubt the rightness of the war in Syria? Are you an American? Are you a terrorist sympathizer? Have you stopped beating your wife? Kind of stuff here. Now, as you know, Trump kind of got caught in a little bit of a flip-flop, which never looks good to the electorate, because just before this false flag chemical attack in Duma, Trump had gone on TV saying he wanted to pull U.S. forces out of Syria, wanted to wind it all down, which sounded really good. And a lot of people said, yeah, we're all in favor of that. Then there was the gas attack and the war was back on. Then Trump came on out and said that what he meant by getting the U.S. troops out was to get a coalition of Mideastern nations to go on in and take the place of the American forces. Well, Egypt has refused. Egypt is saying they want no part of this mess. They didn't create it. They don't feel any obligation to clean it up. Russia is expressing their gratitude to Egypt for refusing to send troops into Syria because the U.S. wants it. And it's another indicator. U.S. influence in the region is on the wane. It is weakening. Over in Iran, their foreign minister has embarked on a tour of world capitals, basically a charm offensive, to try and save the nuclear deal. He's going to speak with the P5+1 and say, P4+1, obviously the United States is out, and try and keep the Iran nuclear deal in place. Now, what's significant about this is obviously Iran wants to continue trading with these countries, and these countries so far are saying, yes, they're going to trade with Iran. They're going to ignore the U.S. sanctions. But there's another aspect of this you need to keep in mind. The reason Trump pulled out of the nuclear deal was all this talk about Iran wants to arm itself up, and Iran is a war power, and Iran is doing this, and Iran is doing that. So no less than 11 identifiable lies in his speech when he announced he was pulling out of that deal. But Iran isn't acting like a country that is becoming militaristic. They're trying to keep commerce going. They're trying to keep peace going. They're willing to stay with the nuclear deal. Now, John Bolton is out there saying that the U.S. may sanction European Union companies which trade with Iran. And I think the world is getting really sick and tired of the U.S. throwing its sanctions weight around. We're already hearing pushback from those European nations, including a threat of retaliatory sanctions against the United States. Now, Europe's economy is weak, that's true, but ours is far more fragile. We can't survive a trade war with Europe. We can't survive sanctions. It's the downside of globalism. The U.S. government weaponized sanctions in order to basically influence other countries. And he's running a very high risk here. In fact, there's an article over here at Tom Luongo saying, will Trump torch the global economy on the bonfire of his vanity? And Trump is out there, again, we want regime change in Iran. We want the Shah back. I'm sorry, he's dead. Well, we'll get the son of the Shah back. And the Savak, they kept those gosh darn Iranians in line. They know how to keep a population under control. So basically, we're going to see the global economy take a hammer blow, a serious, serious hammer blow. Another article castigating Donald Trump, this one out of Zero Hedge, Trump's Pyrrhic victory. The U.S. opts for a path that can only lead to war. Well, of course, that's where it's going. Trump has already said he wants regime change in Iran. Now, they did a regime change in Iran back in 1953. They brought down the legitimately elected government of Mohammad Mossadegh, and they installed the Shah of Iran, who was basically a dictator and a tyrant, and he ruled Iran with an iron fist and gave advantageous deals for Iranian oil to British and American oil companies, until finally the Iranian people got sick and tired of him and they kicked him out. And then the Iranian people held referendums and they put together a new government. That's one of the lies in Trump's speech about how Iran currently is a dictatorship. No, it isn't. They chose to be there. It's their country. If they want to be Islamic, they can be. And then back in 2009, knowing how to carry a grudge, the U.S. tried a regime change in Iran again against Ahmadinejad. And the lies were easily exposed, because now we're dealing in the age of the independent media exposing the lies. And what really brought down that last attempt at regime change were two events. The first was unveiling the flag of the new Iranian Republic, which was the exact same flag that the Shah had used. And that woke everybody in Iran up as to what was going on. Then the son of the Shah got on TV and announced he was ready to resume the peacock throne. And that's when it all started to fall apart. So either by direct invasion or another covert attempt at overthrow, Trump wants regime change in Iran, even though it's not really up to him. It's up to the Iranian voters. Now, if they try a color revolution like they did in 2009, and if it fails like it did in 2009, then it will mean direct military intervention. And if you look at how long we've been in Syria, 7 going on 8 years, it'll take at least that long in Iran. And one of the consequences of Trump's reckless action is it's driven a political wedge between the European Union and the United States, a rather bad one. In fact, over in Germany, Der Spiegel had an illustration depicting Trump as a middle finger flipping off the European Union. It's actually a very nice graphic, by the way. So except for Israel and the neocons, nobody agrees with this. The consensus is the U.S. has gone rogue. And there's an article exactly by that name over at Information Clearinghouse, where Trump has basically just blown off our so-called traditional allies, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, rented lips. And now the United States is aligning with Saudi Arabia and Israel. And that's the new axis of evil: Saudi Arabia, America, Israel. It's a major realignment of U.S. strategic relationships. And here is what is really significant about that. The United States is no longer dealing with the first world. They're now dealing with, if you want to call it, the second world, if not the third world. Trump has lowered our status in the eyes of the rest of the planet. Now, over in Moldova, over half of the Moldovans oppose membership in NATO. They ran a poll and basically found that Moldova's integration into NATO and the EU is only favored by 38% of the country's citizens. Another 22% said Moldova should unite with Romania. So the luster is off the allure of NATO and the European Union. And it's obvious, you can see why. Europe's economy has just been drained by the European Central Bank. Their culture has just all been but obliterated by the refugee crisis. And as far as NATO is concerned, NATO is supposed to be a mutual defense pact, but instead it has become the aggressive arm in all these wars of conquest taking place across that part of the world. So, yeah, we can understand why maybe the Moldovans are saying, not a good idea to be part of either one of them. Okay, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And once again, we have to put on the beg. We need your help. If we're going to stay on the air, if we're going to continue to get the truth out, the big money is all on the side of the liars. That's the reality. These billionaires, they've got all this money that they can spend to hire online shills and basically buy the corporate media up. What Republic Broadcasting Network has is you. And we need you to step up. The postal address to send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number to pledge to become a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 03. Getting on over to the Mediterranean, there is a Russian warship apparently tagging along with the USS Harry S. Truman, and apparently they're just keeping an eye on each other. The warship is called the Yaroslav Mudry, and it's keeping its distance, but it is basically just following the Truman around, keeping an eye on it. Over in Germany, Christian Lindner, leader of the German Free Democratic Party, is saying it's time to back off the tensions with Russia. No sane person wants to fight with Russia. And he says it's time to invite Russia back into the G8 or somehow included in the economic associations to get the commerce going again. Peace through commerce. And he's saying it's time for all the anti-Russian sanctions to be dropped without any conditions. These sanctions are strangling the economies of so many countries around the world. They're harming Europe, they're harming Russia, they're harming American businesses. Also, the U.S. government can get Russia. We got to get Russia. Those Russians are bad. We got to get them. Mike Pompeo is out in Korea basically promising that if Kim Jong-un denuclearizes, the United States will not seek regime change. This is part of the run-up to the meeting between Kim Jong-un and Trump. And Pompeo's out there saying, no, if you give up your nuclear weapons and stop with the long-range missiles, we promise we won't regime change you. And if you believe that one, I have some of Saddam's nukes to sell you. And I can't believe Kim Jong-un would be that naive, especially looking at the histories of Iraq and Libya and so many other places that the U.S. has played the same game with. I'm starting to really think that right after the meeting with Trump, Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in are going to announce a rapid Korean reunification. And that will basically end any U.S. justification to be anywhere on that peninsula, north or south. Now, Pompeo was also holding out a promise of financial investment into North Korea once the nuclear weapons are gone. We're going to send investment over there. We're going to build factories. We're going to help North Korea build their economy. In other words, they're going to turn North Korea into a new source of cheap labor to export American jobs to. Now, North Korea, of course, is formally closing its nuclear test site. Not that they could ever use it for anything ever again. The whole mountain is just fractured from that last bomb they set off. But they are going to basically close all the tunnels with explosives and take down all the buildings, and they're inviting the world press to come and witness all of this. Meanwhile, apparently, people in South Korea are taking all of this peace talk seriously, and they're starting to buy up land right along the edge of the DMZ. All of a sudden, that's turning into prime property. And they're right. If that DMZ comes down, they're going to be in a great position. Open up gas stations and drive-through kimchi shops and stuff for all the people that are going to be traveling back and forth. So, getting on to our domestic political situation here. John Brenner, who was CIA director under Obama, has gone on TV to go on the attack against Donald Trump. And Brennan appeared on MSNBC to discuss the Trump administration securing the release of 3 American hostages held in North Korea. Now, by the way, little side note here. You're going to see this on all the corporate media reporting about it. North Korea has freed the hostages. They freed the hostages. They were not hostages. They were arrested for espionage. But hostage makes them look sympathetic. Anyway, Brennan went on to say that Kim Jong-un was crafty and duped Donald Trump into believing him. So Brennan said, Kim Jong-un is very masterful and very smart. Isn't that weird? Just only a little while ago they were saying the guy was a nutcase. Oh well, change the propaganda. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with a phone call after these few words. Aloha America, welcome back to the show, and we're going to go right to the phones. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha Dustin, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I want to know why God blessed America. How come he didn't bless the Native American Indians, who were the indigenous population of this country?
Well, because they didn't call themselves America. That's why.
I want people to think about that, though. Like, God bless America, or God's chosen ones. If you believe in God or not, look at what's going on in the world with your own eyes. It's all about power. About human beings controlling other human beings. This is what it's about. It's not about God this, God that, or just not about money anymore. These people got oodles of money. Just look at Ivanka's dress today. $2,500 dress probably. Kushner saying we're righteous and all. Righteous and sovereignty he was talking about, Mike? Sovereignty. What about the sovereignty of the Syrian people?
Yeah.
I mean, this is ridiculous.
Well, they're just out there with the sales pitch, trying to convince everybody to go along with their agenda. And you're right about, people using God to get their populations to go to war because it's cheaper than actually paying them. There's a movie called Cold Mountain, which is a really good movie. It takes place during the Civil War. And at one point, there's a line in there where the main protagonist is out there saying, I imagine God must get very tired being called down on both sides of a conflict.
Yeah, Mike, I'm Catholic. I went to catechism. I went to Catholic school, but this is about power. It has nothing to do with God. It's being used. Believe in God or not, this is about power, not about money. It's about power and control over other human beings. The Israelis, not the Israelis per se, but the Zionists, they don't care about the Palestinian people, just like they don't care about the American people. Otherwise, they wouldn't have outsourced your jobs and bailed out the banks and Wall Street and stuck you with the bill. They don't care.
No, they don't. They're all about themselves. They have an unshakable sense of entitlement, and they think the world is supposed to just treat them very well. And everybody else, they're either useful or they're not useful. Remember when Bush called them the useless eaters? Andrew Carnegie actually believed that the super rich were a distinct species of human beings, and that all the rest were they were children of a lesser god, and they were just there to work and make the super rich richer. See, the problem is wealth is addictive. It doesn't matter when you get up to that kind of money. It doesn't matter how much they've got. They got to have more because it's the thrill of getting more that drives them.
Which would be power then, right? Because they have so much wealth, there would just be power to control people. Remember Occupy Wall Street? People ripped on it, but when Occupy Wall Street was walking past Wall Street, the higher-ups were drinking like champagne out the windows, looking out at all the little people down below. That's why they build these buildings so high, Mike, to look down at the little people below. That's what it's about, the small-minded people. We stick them with their TV shows and their sports, right?
Have you ever been to Wall Street? Have you ever been to Wall Street? There are barricades permanently built into the streets there. Where with a flick of a switch, they just shoot right on up. It's a very well-protected area because they understand what it is they're doing to the country, and they understand that people who are awake and realize that private central banking and the stock market aren't there to serve the general population. They exist to serve themselves.
Just like in the old days of old, remember with the kingdoms? The people who didn't have anything lived on the outskirts of the kingdom. The kingdom was surrounded by walls. It's the same now. The walls aren't seen until they come up out of the ground. It's the same system. The kings and the queens and the paupers, right? The nobodies. They raid you for your tax money. They'll take your chickens and your daughter for for the money, right?
Well,
the same today, Mike.
I need to give you a little historical correction here, because the whole point of a large castle was not just to protect the king and queen. The king and queen had their own protection. It was called the keep. But the reason for the larger walls around there was if a foreign enemy was invading your country, you would bring all the workers and farmers inside the castle, because ultimately their labor produced the wealth for the royalty, and so you had to protect them. And that was the purpose of the castle system.
I stand corrected. Hey, Mike, real quick, I want to mention Russia has a surplus. They had paid off their debt to the Soviet Union. It's all paid off. Now they got a surplus. So they got more money coming in than they need. They can give it to the people. I just want people to think about this. We have debt.
Yes.
We don't have a surplus.
We have unpayable debt. We are way past the point where it could ever possibly be repaid. And remember, because of the nature of private central banking, it's impossible to pay off the debt, because by design, the debt always exceeds the available money supply. The reason Russia is able to pay off their debts is that Putin's government took over control of their central bank. It's still privately owned, but it's managed by the government so that Russia's public currency is run as a public utility, the way the American currency was originally set up before the private central bankers got hold of our country. And that's basically when Putin went from being a good friend to at the top of does not get a Christmas card list. Because he's a threat to the system of private central banking around the world. People are going to be looking at Russia, and they're going to say, that's working for them. Why are we not doing that here? Exactly the same has happened in Germany when the Nazis kicked out their private central bank imposed on them by the Treaty of Versailles, came out with a value-based currency. Their economy lit up. It was called the German miracle. And people were looking at that and saying, why aren't we running our economy the way they are? And that's why World War II was engineered.
Just look at the EU. They're debt too. Russia, I want people to remember, China owns Smithfield's Foods, which is the largest pork producer in the U.S. They have the Waldorf Astoria. They own one of the J.P. Morgan, or the bank in New York with the 7 stories, and one of the vaults is a football-size field length. China is the creditor nation. We are a debtor nation. I hate to say this, Mike. I said it before. It's over for us. It's just we're a dying, us and the British and the UK and the EU, not all of it, but Germany might be the best of them all, but they're dying. That's why I bring in all the refugees and trying to prop it up. That's it, man. I mean, it's over.
Yes.
You know, it's just a slow grind, Mike. And
I just hope it falls apart before we find ourselves in a nuclear war, because right now, with all these hotheads and psychotics in power in Washington, D.C., the only thing that's going to prevent a global war that will go nuclear is if the economy collapses, taking the federal government with it.
That's all you need to say, and I have to say, Mike. Have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Kevin in West Virginia. Aloha, Kevin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike. I got a couple of things on my mind. I want to go back to what you were talking about with Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. I agree that you are right that Trump is being duped here, and I think he's being duped by his advisors by stroking his ego, by saying, hey, you brought North Korea to the table. You know, you're going to get a peace prize out of this, or a Nobel Peace Prize. Well, first off, I don't know who in the right mind would want that, because that Peace Prize, Nobel Peace Prize, has been I don't think it's worth anything now. I mean, they gave it to Obama for nothing, and look at all the wars that Obama started around the country.
Yes, around the world.
Of one? Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if Trump is deserving of one, of getting North Korea to the table. He has done a lot. I mean, look at his rhetoric. You can agree or disagree with that. But my point is that I think they're stroking his ego, and they're setting him up for a fall. This deal with North Korea, yeah, it looks absolutely fantastic if we could get them to denuclearize. But like you said, time and time again, every time the United States gets somebody to give up their weapons, it makes it easier for us to go into attack. And I hate to see that. I mean, you have Pompeo, like you reported, you have Pompeo saying, hey, we're not looking for regime change. The first thing that I thought is, Well, they probably are looking for regime change to make it easier to keep North and South Korea separated for the military-industrial complex to keep selling money, or keep selling weapons, not money. But, I was wondering, if you felt the same way, if Donald Trump was being duped in that sense, or is there another reason that he's being duped with this?
Well, first of all, it's no secret that Trump is easy to manipulate. That's been coming out over the last several weeks. Apparently, he does succumb to flattery, and he is out of his depth on a lot of these international issues. So, yeah, at this point, I think he's definitely being manipulated. As far as his accomplishment in North Korea, it really is kind of moot, because had the United States kept their hands off Korea 5 years ago, they'd be reunified today, and there wouldn't be a nuclear issue or hostilities or anything. The United States created this mess, and now that it looks like the mess is cleaning itself up, Trump wants to take credit for it.
Absolutely. And going into what Dustin was talking about with Russia and China, how I look at this, I look at beta fish, and I look at three beta fish. Two fight each other, and the one sits back, and then attacks the one that won, that's pretty well scarred up from the previous fight. And I kind of look at that like Russia, China, and the United States. From what I'm understanding, I've been reading plans that there's plans for once Russia and China get their high-tech gear, that we are going to go to war with them, with the United States, Russia, and China and Russia being allied together. It's just that Russia and China hasn't got their weapons in order yet. And the timeline I'm looking at is 2020 and maybe 2022. But you're right, and Dustin's right. America, you're seeing the death throes of a dying empire.
Yes.
Now, when I'm saying the disclosed wars that I'm talking about, I don't know if it's going to kick off, but the things that I have been reading looks like that's how they're going to bring the United States down, is in a few years with a nuclear war to stop the United States war machine. It has me a little afraid, I'm not going to lie, but I don't know if that's propaganda, if that's disinformation. I'm wondering if you're reading or seeing the same things that I'm seeing, or reading the tea leaves, per se.
I'm seeing pretty much the same thing that you're seeing, and again, I think it's going to happen sooner rather than later, because right now the U.S. government is in a race against the economy. Because if the economy implodes and the government doesn't have a villain to blame it on, or a war to blame it on, then the American people are basically going to be pointing their finger at Wall Street and Washington, D.C., as well they should. So I think, also there's the issue that the American people are starting to stand up and say, this has gone on long enough. We're starting to lose support among the European nations. And so I think if there's going to be a war against Russia and China, it'll happen sooner rather than later. All it's going to take is one hothead to really kick it off.
I agree. Well, that's all I have for you, sir. I hope you have a great and wonderful show, and keep giving Miss Claire the best. I hope she's doing better and doing well.
Yes, she is. She actually is. And thank you very much for your concern. We're going to switch over to Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Mike?
Doing great.
Mike, what's happening in Israel now is fine. What they're doing to the Palestinians. And what disgusted me today was Alex Jones. He's supporting this. I expect this from the mainstream media support. I don't expect from Alex Jones.
Well, Alex has always been a supporter of Israel, and that ultimately was the reason why I left the Genesis Communications Network to come over here to RBN.
I mean, it was like listening to Fox News today, listening to him.
Yeah.
And, last hour Salente came on. I don't know how Salente even comes on anymore. To be honest with you, he's totally stands for different things than Alex Jones. He's for peace. He's getting our troops out of all these places in the world. Jones is just backing up Trump. All he'll do now is he'll say Trump is good, he's great, he's this, he's that. I don't know. I don't know if he's been bought off, or if he just, his power corrupts. He's getting bigger and bigger, and maybe he's make deals with some of these corporate monsters in order to get onto radio stations, their AM and FM radio stations, or what? I mean, he's just, you know, he keeps on saying much bigger. What he should really do is go back to the old Alex Jones, the internet. He's plenty popular then. He doesn't need this stuff.
Well, yeah, he does, because his larger audience is why people like Gerald Salende will come on his show, even if they don't agree with him. They want to get that reach.
On his old show, I've been, you know, listening to Alex Jones since I don't know, around 2008. In fact, I remember when you were a guest on there.
Yes.
A couple of times.
Yes.
You know, and Salente's been on there all the time. As far as I remember, as a matter of fact, I got to know who Gerald Salente is through Alex Jones. And there are certain people, like, I don't know if you remember this guy Talkley. He's not on there anymore. He doesn't come on anymore.
Yeah.
She came on a few years ago, but Cynthia McKinney hasn't been on in a long time. I don't know. I think the man is destroying his own reputation. He's turning out to be a hypocrite, and it's a shame, because when you think alternate media, that's the first guy that comes to mind.
He does that well, along with Matt Drudge, for example. But if you go to YouTube and do a search for Alex Jones, I Support Israel, you'll see a video from very early in his career where he basically declared he was an ally of Israel, and at that point, his rise to media stardom began.
By the way, I just want your listeners to know, and you might want to look this up, Blackstone Intelligence. I don't know if you ever heard of it.
Yes.
But this guy's very good. Anyway, he really detailed, I was looking at it on YouTube this weekend, and he detailed exactly Trump's connection to the Rothschilds and how he was bailed out by the Rothschild Bank back in the 1980s when he went into bankruptcy, because his evidently real estate in New York had rock bottom at that time, and they bailed him out. And this is where a lot of these connections are. And and also this Wilbur Ross is now the what do you call it, the Commerce Secretary?
Yes.
His connections to Rothschild, his connections to Trump back then to bail him out. So I think people got to start, you know, wising up and understanding who and what Trump really is too. He is not playing 4D chess. He's controlled. I think the guy who's got him really, who's really had him down pat from the get-go is Richie Allen. I know you've been Richie Allen.
Mark, got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back with more news. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. I want to back up here a little bit to what's going on between Israel and Gaza right now, and to just show you how pathetic the propaganda is getting. Israel and the U.S. are now taking the position that Hamas put all those protesters out there to be shot by the Israelis as a propaganda stunt. In other words, they made us kill them, mommy. That really takes the cake there. They were peaceful protesters. They had flags, they had placards. And Israel was using expanding ammunition designed to just absolutely maim, if not kill outright, anybody it hits. China has just begun testing the Type 001A, its second aircraft carrier, but the first to be built in China. They have one other carrier that they acquired elsewhere. It's 70,000 tons, and it can do 31 knots. And it's got the little ski jump on the front. And apparently this will carry 36 J-15 Hunters on board. So everybody's arming up for the coming war here. Now, Erdogan is saying Israel is pushing the Middle East into war, and it certainly does look like it. With all of these escalations going on all over the place, Israel's escalations into Syria, and again, to counter the corporate media propaganda, Syria didn't just uncork on the Golan with all those rockets. They were responding to the Israeli attack that happened just an hour after Trump pulled out of the Iran deal. Israel struck first. The corporate media is dedicated to portraying the Syrians as evil and Israel as the poor helpless victim. because after all, a nation that has 400 nuclear weapons has to be protected and supported here. So Erdogan is out there saying Israel's pushing the region into war. He's absolutely correct on that. Erdogan also said that the U.S. chose to be part of the problem, not a solution, with the embassy moved to Jerusalem. And in response to what's going on between Israel and Gaza, Turkey has now recalled their ambassadors both from Israel and the United States. Speaking of ambassadors, the U.S. ambassador to Israel was president of an American charity that donated money to a Jewish group designated a terrorist organization by the United States. And this was reported in the Israeli media just days before he was due to open the new embassy in Jerusalem. This is David Friedman we're talking about. He was president of American Friends of Beit Yeshiva Center between 2011 and 2017, which raises about $2 million a year for settler-linked programs, meaning the illegal settlements. Now, speaking of the illegal settlements, apparently the Israeli army has now installed 2 iron gates on roads leading to farmlands near Bethlehem, blocking the Palestinians from accessing their own land and setting the stage for a possible new illegal settlement. We'll be back after station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. I have, in the past, returned to the topic of election fraud in this country. And it is a serious, serious problem. And I have to wonder why Donald Trump, who had to overcome massive election fraud to win the White House, seems rather unconcerned about the problem. Now, he did set up an election integrity commission, but that's been disbanded. Supposedly, the Department of Homeland Security is looking into the problem, but they are part of the deep state. So nothing's getting done. Now, over in Pennsylvania, Attorney General Josh Shapiro says 59-year-old Thurman George, a machine inspector at Poll 43/7, pled guilty to frauds by election officers. George, along with 3 other election workers, were accused of harassment and intimidation against voters who wanted to vote for candidates of their choice, but not the candidate being pushed by the city's Democratic Party machine. Minority Inspector Calvin Maddox previously pled guilty to not meeting the qualifications of election officers for living outside the district where he was working. Now, this incident happened during a special election in March 2017 for the 197th State House District. Now, down in Broward County, which have elections so crooked you have to screw those ballots into the ballot boxes, their supervisor of elections office violated both state and federal laws by destroying ballots from the 2016 congressional race too soon. This is a court ruling. There's been a lawsuit involved. Now, based on the ruling, Florida's Department of State will send election experts to Broward Elections Office in the upcoming election to ensure that all laws are followed. Well, the damage is already done. Congressional candidate Tim Kaonohi had sought to look at the paper ballots in his race following his loss to Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz in the Democratic primary. So Kaonohi took Election Supervisor Snipes to court in June of 2017 when her office refused his request for the paper ballots, which are supposed to be, okay, hang on a second, word from the control room here. And the law is those paper ballots are supposed to be kept in case of an election challenge, and that's exactly what happened. Tim Kaonohi lost by a very narrow margin. He wanted to look at the paper ballots. Snipes refused. He took her to court, and it's come on out that Snipes approved the destruction of the ballots in September by signing a certification that said no court cases involving the ballots were pending. In other words, she lied. All right, let's go to the phones here. Daniel in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, aloha, Mike. Yeah, the other day I was listening to CBC radio here, and they were talking about protesters getting shot and killed. And they were talking about how, it was a repressive regime, and it was run by a dictator. And I was a little taken aback. And then I realized they're talking about Nicaragua and Daniel Ortega's government. So apparently, if you're Israel and Netanyahu, you can kill innocent, children throwing rocks. But if you're anyone else, you're labeled a regime, a junta, and a dictator. So I just thought I'd add that. It's kind of funny how the media, it just makes our reality for us.
Well, that's their job. That's their job. The media is the blue pill, and their job is to basically sell you a certain point of view, a certain agenda, a new car, a new cell phone, a new president. Well, not in the case of 2016. They were trying to sell you the other candidate. But that's their job. That's what they're paid the big bucks for. It doesn't cost an awful lot to put the truth out there. It costs something. That's why we need your help. But the really good liars, that's why they make those huge salaries, because they can get up there and look into that camera and just absolutely convince you that up is down, left is right, and black is white.
Yeah, it's funny too. Like I never hear anything about Israel's nuclear arsenal. It's like it doesn't exist. This is another thing that the media hides from us. And back in the WikiLeaks
hang on, I'd like to respond to that.
Back,
I'd like to respond to that. That's why we have the independent media to report on those things. And the corporate media has sort of tangentially mentioned the issue a couple of times, especially when those documents emerged from the former government of South Africa. They had to cover that. They couldn't ignore it. But yeah, the corporate media is there to protect Israel from criticism.
Yeah, like Iran, how could Iran possibly be a threat? They don't have nukes. So if they did use one, they would be turned into a parking lot in about 20 minutes.
You're absolutely
right. We're never told that either.
You're absolutely right. The nuclear threat in the Middle East is Israel, which has nuclear weapons, the means to deliver them, and a demonstrated historical belligerence to everybody else around them.
Yeah, and they don't even mention the fact that Netanyahu helped, steal some of that stuff from the United States with Arnon Milchan.
Yes.
Back in the 1970s. So
they got a lot of that stuff from here in the United States. There was that Numex scandal. Yeah. They got the weapons-grade uranium for their first few nuclear weapons from right here in the good old U.S. of A. And everybody who was supposed to prevent that kind of thing from happening just looked the other way. I remember hearing the story on TV about how there was this weapons-grade uranium plant that had come up with a huge material unaccounted for. And the 24 hours later, the report was saying, nothing to worry about, it's just stuck on the inside of the pipes in the facility and everything is just fine, go back to sleep. Yeah,
it's funny that WikiLeaks cable that came out that said Colin Powell mentioned, I think he was talking to John Podesta about Israel's 200 nuclear weapons. And that got leaked, so I don't know. They were not even supposed to, the United States isn't supposed to give any aid to Israel because of their nukes that they don't declare.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Do you remember Obama's first press conference as president? And Helen Thomas asked him point blank, what nations in the Middle East have nuclear weapons right now? And Obama put on his tap shoes and he tapped away saying, well, we're concerned about escalation in the Middle East, and obviously proliferation is an issue we have to look at. And 24 hours later, Helen Thomas was gone.
Yeah.
Kicked off the press.
She was a real Semite, actually.
and then somebody ambushed her with a cell phone camera to try and make her look like an anti-Semite a couple of days later.
Yeah, and then she said, I am a Semite.
Yes.
She's like Lebanese or even Palestinian, I can't remember. But, yeah, she was a legend. All right, thanks, Mike. I'll leave you with that.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go, and we're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Pardon me. Continuing with the domestic politics here, story coming on out from 12160, basically saying that the primary motive appears to be for this Trump-Russia collusion story was to undermine his transition and his presidency right from the very start. And frankly, if you pull back from how high up in office these people are and how much money they make, they're really behaving like a spoiled child. And the most spoiled child of all, of course, is Hillary Clinton, who was absolutely convinced that she had a lock on the Oval Office until the American people stood up and voted so overwhelmingly for Trump that it swamped her fraud. It swamped the illegal immigrant election voters, swamped the rigged machines. And apparently Hillary beat up Podesta that night, if I recall correctly. Couldn't even give a concession speech when she finally showed up on TV. She looked like, well, she did not look well. She looked like at least a case of vodka. But that's what it was all about. Trump-Russia collusion to undermine the transition and start to undermine his presidency and try and find some way to bring him down. Now, I don't know why, because they're not going to take Trump out of office and give it to Hillary as the runner-up. It doesn't work that way. If Trump is kicked out of the Oval Office or something else happens to him, Mike Pence steps on in. And again, I don't understand why there is still this fury against Donald Trump, because he's giving the deep state everything that they want. He has just caved on all of these issues. And I'm starting to think that all of this Robert Mueller stuff, it's just pure spite. They want to prove that they are in control of the government, and to heck with whoever thinks they're the president. We're really in charge. Now, the big scandal that's coming on now is that there was at least one FBI spy in the Trump campaign. There may have been as many as 3. Republican Representative Ron DeSantis of Florida thinks he may know the identity of at least one of them, but he says there needs to be an investigation, because the FBI is not supposed to spy on political campaigns. And if they were spying on Trump, where was the information going? Was there an ongoing FBI investigation into the Trump campaign? Or were they stealing the information to give to Hillary's campaign? And that, too, was something that was part of the Watergate scandal. The use of intelligence agencies to spy on the Democratic candidates during the primary season and wreck their campaigns so that Nixon could run against George McGovern, which he knew he could just steamroll over. And he did. It was the largest election margin, victory margin of a midterm election or second-term election of any president in American history. But it's all illegal. Now, if you are a truth activist, you've probably heard the pejoratives, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. The phrase conspiracy theorist was actually invented by the CIA in the wake of the John F. Kennedy assassination as a dismissive for anybody who was asking embarrassing questions, of which there were so many. And so rather than try and actually address the questions because they couldn't, they would say, oh, you're just being a conspiracy theorist. Conspiracy theorists go away. Nobody's listening to conspiracy theorists. And that was followed up by the idea that, oh, you're just being paranoid. You're into conspiracy theories because you're paranoid. Don't be paranoid. Obviously, the implication being that anybody who wants the truth over the lies is somehow mentally ill, which is something Stalin used to do in the Soviet Union. If you questioned the Soviet Union's policies, they would declare you mentally ill to discredit you, throw you in a mental hospital. So that even if you managed to get on out, nobody would ever listen to you ever again. Oh, he's a nut job, or whatever the Russian equivalent of that is. However, there's a study that just came on out from the European Journal of Social Psychology that said conspiracy theorists are not, in fact, paranoid. They don't fit the classic definition of paranoia. Paranoia is when somebody feels that everybody in the world is out to get them. And that's not what conspiracy theorists are thinking. Conspiracy theorists are pointing to the evidence that certain powerful individuals are out to get the rest of us. It's almost a diametric opposite. So if you think you're a conspiracy theorist or you're proud to be a conspiracy theorist, that should relax you a little bit. Over at the Fox News channel, apparently retired Air Force Lieutenant General Tom McInerney made a comment about Songbird John McCain. Now, that is an established fact. John McCain cooperated with the North Vietnamese. He made propaganda tapes for them. Some of them have surfaced on the internet. You can hunt them down if you want. But because of that comment on the air, Fox News has basically fired Lieutenant General Tom McInerney. Now, getting on to the economic news. U.S. Treasury shorts hit a record high as foreign banks dump bonds. And it's been a real roller coaster ride for the rates. And it didn't stop large speculators adding to their record high short positions. Apparently a lot of people are thinking that the bonds may take a bit of a tumble. And there is a Treasury bond bubble. Because every time the U.S. government needs to borrow more money, and they're borrowing like crazy, the U.S. Treasury will print up a Treasury bond, which will be taken over to the Federal Reserve, which will then basically create the money out of thin air for the U.S. government to spend. There are two problems with that. First, when the total amount of money in circulation grows, the value of individual dollars declines. That's called inflation. And that's why you're already seeing prices go up at the gas station and especially at your supermarket. It's kind of a way of collectively robbing the entire population for the money the government wants to spend. Or if you prefer another term for it, it's a hidden tax. Inflation is a hidden tax. The other problem, of course, is that they've made so many of these Treasury bonds, they can never be redeemed. Because what backs a Treasury bond? What backs a Federal Reserve note? Your future slave labor. Because that's what a Treasury bond says. That somewhere down the road, the government will take money away from you without giving you anything for it and give it back to the private central bank. And by the way, little footnote, you're not allowed to create your money out of thin air. They will put you in jail for that. It's okay for the Federal Reserve to do that, create money out of thin air, but not okay for you. Which should tell you the pecking order of things in this country. It's estimated that by 2020, over half of all personal income taxes will be used just to service the national debt. And by service the national debt, they don't mean paying down the principal. There hasn't been a payment on the principal of the U.S. debt in decades. It's merely paying the interest. Over half of all personal income taxes just to pay the interest on the national debt. You are all debt slaves, and the private central bank was set up to make you that way, with the willing complicity of the United States federal government, the U.S. Congress, and President Woodrow Wilson. Story coming out of Investment Watch blog. Experts are saying it's looking like 2008 all over again. Manarino is saying we're seeing history repeat itself. Well, one of the reasons we're seeing history repeat itself is because those who caused the mess in 2008 escaped the pain for it. The losses from the meltdown of the mortgage-backed security fraud, for the most part, fell on the American people with bailouts and quantitative easing and TARP and all the rest of it. Congress, who I'm sure their stock portfolios are invested in those Wall Street firms, voted their wallets. And they voted to basically take money away from the American people who did not create that mess and give it to the bankers. And so the bankers had no incentive to learn from what they had done and every incentive to say, hey, we can do it again. And if it messes up, our good buddies in Congress, they'll just take more money from the American people and give it to us to sort out the mess. Well, that may not be as easy as it sounds this time. Another article here out of Russia Today. A third of the U.S. stock market may be wiped out as consumer spending is maxed out. This according to Saxo Bank chief economist Steen Jacobson. And he's looking at factors including growing credit loans and fiscal deficit. And it says all the data is that the consumer is maxed out. There's nothing left. And I've been telling you that for the last 6 months. There's no more out here. And as long as Wall Street continues to operate as if there is still a vast pool of untapped wealth in your pockets and you're just being a greedy person to not share it, then we're definitely headed for a major crash. Consumer debt has increased by 47% since 2008. People are being forced to live on their credit cards because of the low wages and salaries. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go back to the phones to Brendan in San Francisco. Aloha, Brendan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Simply, I just want to say we need to stop funding these wars. We need to stop funding all this illegal government. And that's something I think even liberals, left, right, conservative, everyone should be able to agree that we cannot keep funding this machine, this monster. That's the only power we have is the purse strings. And if we can organize and get our junk together, we could probably make a dent in it. Like, we're just paying our taxes like useful idiots. And we should be able to say where specifically our tax dollars are spent, and I guarantee you, you'll probably never see another war. You know, again, if people could truly say where their tax dollars go. What do you think?
Well, I used to think that instead of the 1040 form, that all Americans should be sent a shopping list, and on it are all the things the government wants to do with a little price of what it's going to cost for that individual taxpayer and a little checkbox. And you would just go down that checkbox and say, yeah, roads, schools, hospitals, skip over the ones about war and money for Israel, and then you'd tally it up, and that would be how much you'd send on in. But of course, the whole point of the government is they don't want you to have a say over where your money goes, because
right, we know this.
Yeah.
So let's do something about it, and let's make it a freaking point to, you know, I'll talk to every liberal, you know, I don't want to use a bad word, but these folks that are brain dead, and go, do you really want to fund wars? Do you want to fund Israel? I mean, there should be free airtime for any politician that wants to, you know, run for office and say this is part of the public good. You know, you don't need $1 billion to run for office anymore. You get free airtime and whatever other
you do. I mean, the system has become totally corrupted. I mean, when our country was set on up, there were rules to basically make sure that our elected representatives really did represent their constituents by limiting the amount of money that they could collect from individuals so that the ultra-rich couldn't buy them. And then those laws got voted out because members of Congress are greedy. And once those laws were out, then the rich could buy the government. And, you know, those rich people who wanted war, they're going to get their war.
Right. So here we go again. We simply have to prioritize, you know, taking control of our purse strings. And every other thing is secondary to that, because if they have the money, they just can continue on this path. And we could do like a Tea Party thing and say, you have to swear an oath to abide by this, you know, don't write bills and laws that subvert what we're trying to do. We want our country back. And the Tea Party was pretty successful with getting Republicans to state where they stood on, you know, abortion or guns or whatnot. I mean, this tax thing could be the game changer, because I don't see any other way out of this mess. I mean, we're paying for our own demise. We're paying for our own enslavement. And I mean, if we can have everyone on the tip of their tongue say, we're not paying for this crap anymore. I mean, I think about this long and hard, and I don't see any other way, man.
Well,
so there you go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The problem here right now is that the government, rather the Federal Reserve, is simply printing up whatever money the government needs to prosecute the war. And then our great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren will get that bill. Again, I do not favor a violent revolution, I don't think the American people are ready for that yet, but I continue to see signs that this country is very fragile, both economically and in terms of the federal government. I'm seeing stark parallels between the parallels between the U.S. and the former Soviet Union and the Roman Empire. And it always comes down to the same thing.
Right.
Too much spending on war until you bankrupt the country.
Right. You've stated it quite clearly in your all wars are bankers' wars. I mean, it's right there in black and white. And so with that said, it seems like we're doing a big circle jerk where we just keep going around and around. We need to take control of the narrative and say we're not paying for this crap anymore and start getting everyone on the tip of their tongue, because there are more of us than them. And if we can just get past all this division, divide and conquer, we can start drumming this thing home and to a point where everyone, liberal, conservative, we're all going to agree on this. We have to. I mean, who wants to blow up poor people and brown people and whatever other, and the taxation without representation, I mean, man, this is the argument, and that's it, and I appreciate your time. Thanks.
All right, well, thanks an awful lot, and I know there's a lot of very frustrated and angry people who are out there wondering, what are we going to do? And obviously, there are limits on what we can do, and it was set up that way. The elections are rigged, so we can't vote people out who are loyal to a foreign government. The private central bankers are in control of the economy. All we can do is continue to educate our fellow American citizens so that they don't have the support to go to war. Go back to your Sun Tzu. We got to take another break for commercials. Back with more phone calls after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go back to the phones to Andrea in Oklahoma. Aloha, Andrea. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Yes, aloha. I don't know if you've seen American Made, but it's outstanding, and talk about feeling helpless. All the back money coming from the government, how they went and found Mr. Seal to run
Yes.
whatever they wanted, and it's a very incredible 5-star movie, if not above. I held off watching it considering 2 pilots were killed just making it, but I finally watched it and was, gritting my teeth at the end. Of course, he's expendable, but all the money that our country was making, and it was, and I take a look at Google Map, Mena, Arkansas is still booming.
Yes.
Of course, he opened tons and tons. He opened all these banks just so he could put his money. He was laundering money. It's a shame he didn't buy hotels, and he opened banks in Miami. But our government is so deep into this, and they have not let up. They have gone full, speed since this movie was made.
Andrea, I need to give you a couple of corrections. First of all, Seal didn't keep all that money himself, and it wasn't the country that was making the money. It was the Central Intelligence Agency. It was an off-the-books operation where the CIA needed a source of funds that did not come from the Congress and was therefore free of congressional oversight, so that they could conduct black operations that nobody knew about. They'd been doing the same thing back in Vietnam with their heroin smuggling into the United States. And Barry Seal was one of several pilots that were running this smuggling network. It was a gun and drug running operation, guns down to the Nicaraguan Contras. The same planes would bring the cocaine back. It would be sold, and it was being laundered. And a lot of this centered on then Governor Bill Clinton. And an institution known as the Arkansas Development Finance Authority, which was basically how the money was paid out to the suppliers of the clandestine operation, the people who were making these untraceable guns. They were given these business loans by the Arkansas Development Finance Authority, which were then just written off. And that was the money machine. That's where it was all coming from. They were laundering that money through land flip deals like Whitewater, Flowerwood, Castle Grande, through banks like Madison Guarantee, and through whatever it is that Barry Seal set on up. But I know the movie glamorized him, and didn't go far enough into the connections to Bush and Clinton. But he really was just an errand boy, very highly paid errand boy, but he was an errand boy. And then he got caught by the DEA and got caught in a war between DEA and CIA.
They also showed in the movie, they only showed Reagan, but it's just a taste. This is just a taste of what our government does behind closed doors. And it's like, how will we get a grip? Whenever I file for taxes, I get my money back. I always claim one, so I never have to pay the government and now since, I had that one, I haven't worked since October of 2016, and it was just having that conversation at the coffee pot about 9/11, and I threw in about, the Larry Silverstein, the dancing Jews, and the van full of bombs, and how they were, taken back to Israel, and nobody's been, nobody's looking in that direction. And I mentioned that about the BBC standing in front of Building 7, and I haven't been hired since. And I'm a drafter, I'm a graphic illustrator, I can do websites, but nobody will hire me. I guess I've really been blackballed just by mentioning that. And so it's just, it goes so deep. Who knows how deep it goes, and it will be hard to pull up the reins if we ever, are able to pull up the reins. We will need somebody like you in office that could, really, keep an eye on things, but it's like so much goes under the surface that I'm sure money just flows everywhere.
It is the haves and the have-nots. Basically, one of the problems that we are having to deal with in trying to educate the American public are all those Americans who made that moral compromise to say, I can get a better job if I'm willing to go along with, the knowledge that the CIA is smuggling cocaine and selling it to our kids, that this person was assassinated. I remember my first taste of just how much control was being exerted was all the way back in 1994 when I had first uncovered the evidence that Vince Foster's suicide was questionable. And I'd worked at all three networks, and I had friends in all three newsrooms. And I went to all of them and I said, you need to look at this. And they said, no, we can't look at that. That's the third rail. If I touch that, it's my job. They already knew Vince Foster had been murdered. And I lost a lot of respect for those people, not because they didn't want to talk to me anymore. I didn't really care about that, but because these were supposed to be newsmen and newswomen, and instead they had made that moral compromise. I want to keep my nice, well-paying job, therefore I will look the other way at government wrongdoing.
That saying, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, I'm thinking that is, there has to be chaos before you can create order. You have to just tear it all down. And I think since our president didn't do that, tear it all down as he walked in, you still have the disorder. And I just want to leave that as a thought for people to think about. I always hated that.
I don't think we have to tear it all down. I think it's coming down. I don't think they can save it. All we can try and do is somehow restrain the U.S. government from blowing up the planet in its final death throes as it thrashes around on the floor.
I don't know. If anybody hits Dimona, won't that happen? I mean, there's so many nuclear bombs in one place. Won't it just blow the world in half?
No, Dimona's the factory. Israel disperses their nuclear weapons all across the country. Everybody with nuclear weapons disperses them. You don't want them all in one place because then they can all be destroyed by a single incoming missile. And that sort of erases their deterrent value.
Okay, well, that's a new thought. I'll have to think about that one.
No, we have...
All right, well, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, all right, you've got it. Thanks an awful lot, Andrea. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are now open. Yeah, when you have nuclear weapons, you have them spread out all over. You don't want them all in a bunch. One of the biggest tactical mistakes, probably intentional, during Pearl Harbor was instead of dispersing the U.S. aircraft all over Pearl Harbor and to the outlying airfields, they bunched them up together in just one big lump in the middle of the runways, under the excuse that they were more concerned about saboteurs than by an air attack, which ultimately didn't work on out. Okay, an annual financial report released by the Treasury Department showed the U.S. government lost over $1 trillion in 2017. It's getting to be a big problem how much money just goes missing in the U.S. government. And it was $1 trillion just in 2017. That's more than Australia's entire gross domestic product. It's a huge sum of money. I remember all the way back on September 10th, when Donald Rumsfeld got up there at the Pentagon and said, well, we've misplaced $3 trillion. Should have been the financial scandal of the year. But of course, 24 hours later, 9/11 happened, and Donald Rumsfeld got off scot-free from that little revelation here. Story coming on out from Russia Today. America is on its way to a $30 trillion debt by 2028, and much of it is from the military expenditures. You're just borrowing and spending money on the military like crazy. And at some point, somebody really needs to ask, are we really going to obtain enough wealth from these nations that are being invaded and regime changed that we're ever going to be able to pay that back? Somebody needs to spreadsheet that out. Because you could win a war and still be running deeply in the red. Now, as you know, Russia has been buying a lot of gold. Gold prices are expected to rise in the near future. And right now, Russia has by far the best gold to monetary base ratio of the G8 countries. In other words, a larger percentage of Russia's currency is backed by gold than any of the other G8 countries, many of which don't back their currencies with any gold at all, such as the United States of America. Over in Chicago, as you know, they are one of the many places dealing with a public pensions crisis. And the Chicago Federal Reserve Bank and the Civic Federation got together with an event talking about the pensions and said they'd actually come up with a solution. It's a special property assessment, which would be about 1% of the actual property value each year for 30 years, and they can replace the money in the pension funds. So homeowners with houses worth $250,000 will pay an additional $2,500 every year in property taxes. Those with homes worth $500,000 would pay an additional $5,000, and those with homes worth $1 million would pay an additional $10,000. So what is going on here? It's another double shuffle. The reason the pensions are defunded goes back to 2008 and the mortgage-backed security fraud, when they were just playing fast and loose with these mortgage bundles. Some of these mortgages were pledged to more than one bundle. It was such a hot item. People were just cutting corners, and they broke the securitization chain, so people didn't care if the mortgages were good or not when they put them into these bundles. And because Wall Street's pet rating agencies said these are all AAA, pension funds were allowed to buy them. And when it all came apart, the pensions were defunded. And so what's the solution? Take more money away from the people to replace what the bankers took from the pension funds. That's what they're really talking about here. Once again, they're going to soak the American people to pay for the sins of Wall Street. Now, Volvo has come out with a rather interesting admission, and it's probably going to have a significant impact on China relations here. But Volvo is saying that their cars, which are being built in China, might actually be superior in quality to those it makes in Europe. And everybody knows China is a manufacturing powerhouse. They're all raised to respect the idea of making things, making good things. Yes, they'll make junk if that's what the importers want to import. but they make good things, things we can't even make in the United States, like the iPhone. So in an interview with Australia's Go Auto, Volvo's Senior Vice President of Design, Robin Page, admitted that some people were concerned about the automaker's decision to build many of its vehicles in China, and he came on back and said, we're getting a better quality vehicle. Now, I remember back when we had our Xterra, and I got it because it had a good reputation, and then all of a sudden we had problems with it. Electrical system went out, we lost 2 engines, and finally I just bailed it up and donated it to Kidney Cars. And I was talking to the dealership, and they said, well, actually there's a problem, because the Xterras actually made in Japan are wonderful, but the ones that were being built in the United States had serious deficiencies in them. And it's another reminder how the transformation of our educational system into an indoctrination system has left the local workforce without the necessary skills to compete in a global market. All right, let's take a phone call. Errol in the Netherlands. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you for taking my call, Mike. It's amazing how to see the isolation of American workforce. Not only the workforce, but in a sense of what we are now seeing in the total world spectrum. The spectrum is normally that we are not only, but anymore in an unipolar world. We are now in a multipolar world.
Yes.
And that is what America sees to fail to see. And what we are seeing now with Iran happening, with the non-proliferation treaty, the people that are not in the non-proliferation treaty, it's also Israel. So Israel is dealing the cards for the United States and putting it back to Europe. And Europe, look at how many workplaces they are lost now with the GCPO.
Yes.
They just killed so many workplaces in America, in Europe, to just block the GCPOA. It's amazing. I was like, what are they doing? This is a total isolation of America and Israel. So Israel, America, and I think even Great Britain are now at the point that they are isolating themselves. This is beyond stupidity.
I agree. Absolutely agree here. I mean, neither Europe nor the United States has the surplus jobs to lose. I know we're told it's a 4% unemployment rate, which is a flat-out lie. We have almost 100 million Americans willing and able to work who have not been able to find jobs for months, if not years. And then we have all of these illegal immigrants and refugees pouring on in, making the situation worse. And to undertake an action which results in American companies having to lay workers off, like Boeing, it clearly shows that nobody in Washington, D.C. is maintaining an overview of what's best for the nation as a whole. And that's supposed to be Trump's job. Everybody in Washington, D.C. is out for their own little agenda. I got to take care of the Federal Reserve. I got to take care of Israel. I want to get a war with Iran. And that's all they're thinking about. Anyway, Errol, I got to let you go. We got to do a commercial break. Thank you very much. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the economy. We're talking about China. And again, backlash from Trump pulling out of the Iran deal. Iran has ditched the U.S. dollar in oil trade. And as a result, China's petro yuan is just roaring into action. So Trump just wanted to make Israel happy, and he didn't think it all the way through. If there is one job that the president is supposed to do, it's maintain the overview of what's best for the nation as a whole, and not just cave in to special interests, cave into Israel, cave into Wall Street, cave into the big pharma, because we can see what it's doing to our country. We can absolutely see what it's doing to our country. Now, Trump appears to be backing down on the China trade threat, and he's instructed the Commerce Department to find some way to rescue ZTE, which is a manufacturer of cell phone handsets. And they're basically trying to make nice. And the reason Trump may be backing off this trade war with China is because China is a huge consumer of U.S. pork and automobiles. And that could really hurt us if those get tariffed. The U.S. cannot win a trade war, both because of the lack of manufacturing and because of that debt problem. We don't have the economic resiliency to ride out a trade war. Now, down in Venezuela, things are getting really, really bad, and you should study that, because if the, let me rephrase, when the U.S. economy collapses, it's going to be that bad here. And thousands of Venezuelans are now pouring across the border into Colombia, and so now Colombia is starting to feel the strain of those refugees. They don't have jobs for them all. The economy takes time to adjust to a growth in population, and if that growth happens too quickly, the economy can't accommodate it. Now, Brussels is planning a, well, they're calling it a transition extension. And basically, Brussels is trying to write this into Britain's Brexit deal, and it will delay the transition by 6 months. And then another 6 months, and another 6 months, and another 6 months, and another 6 months, and so forth and so on. The House of Lords in London is arguing for the same thing. We shouldn't have to abide by that original deadline deal to leave the EU. I mean, why is everybody in such a rush here? We'll just ask anybody who lives anywhere those refugees pouring in through the Channel Tunnel are showing up. Remember, it came on out, apparently quite a few members of the House of Lords are getting huge financial subsidies from the European Union. Can you say conflict of interest? I knew you could. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And I know I keep going back to this, but there are some new developments, and with the situation in Israel and Gaza. Netanyahu is now trying to defend what is now already being called Bloody Monday by saying that Israel has a right to defend its borders against the terrorist organization Hamas, which is trying to send thousands of Palestinians into Israel to wipe Israel off the map. Now, to underscore just how silly that is, the Palestinians don't have weapons. They have, some of them have slingshots. That's about it. The Israelis have sniper rifles, body armor, mortars, tear gas, incendiary bombs, all the way up to nuclear weapons. This idea that the population of Gaza represents some kind of an existential threat to Israel is total, utter, kosher bovine excrement. Netanyahu realizes he's got a PR problem on his hands, but every time he opens his mouth, he's just making it worse. All right, let's take a phone call. Eric in Tennessee. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, you've always said that all wars are bankers' wars.
Yes.
And the banking problem are the bankers. And the solution to the problem are the cryptocurrencies, because they're not under the hand or under the control of the bankers.
Oh, well, let me back up here a little bit. Let me back up here a little bit. The problem are the private central banks, which are essentially legalized counterfeiting operations. They create the money out of thin air and loan it into circulation at interest. Your ordinary depositor bank like you're probably doing business with, that's actually a very useful tool to organize the capital of a community and make it available for development projects that could not be funded by the individual. I just wanted to get that clarification out. And I understand the theory behind cryptocurrencies. My concern is that we have seen so much manipulation and hacking into the wallets. The bottom line for me is it doesn't have a currency, it doesn't have a commodity base. And we've got to have a currency
Let
with
me
a
ask
commodity
you.
base.
Yeah, can I ask you a question about the Hawaii law they just passed a while back? Well, it's been a couple of months now. And they outlawed cryptos or outlawed Bitcoin?
They outlawed having a wallet inside, a cryptocurrency wallet inside Hawaii. They can't legislate for the other states, of course. And I was never really enthusiastic about the cryptocurrencies anyway, because they do have the smell of tulips about them. And there are enough major...
Okay. Have you heard about the...
Eric,
have you heard about the new one?
Eric, Eric,
yes.
Please stop interrupting me.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, sorry.
My concern is there because of all these Bitcoin mining machines. I mean, people are stealing computers to mine these Bitcoins. Yeah. And the problem is, if somebody is able to get enough Bitcoins to start an upward trend in the price, they could do a classic pump and dump. And there'd be nothing to hold up the price of the Bitcoin if confidence in it fell, because it has no commodity base.
How about a gold-backed cryptocurrency?
If there was a gold-backed cryptocurrency, I think that would possibly be workable.
There is, right now. It's actually going to go live in, I think, about 5 or 6 days.
Send me a URL. I'll take a look.
Bank Coin. CaratBankCoin.io.
Wait a minute. I think, didn't they try the same thing a few years back?
No, not at all. Never.
Okay.
Hey, Karat just recently got into the crypto sphere, and they're the first company that are backing their cryptocurrency by half the gold at this point.
Well,
so it's something to look at.
Send me the URL. Send me the URL, and I'll take a look at it. Okay.
Okay, well, it's just as simple. It's CaratBankCoin.io, and you can get on there. You can set up an account and log in and check it out, you know.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks an awful lot.
But it's an incredible opportunity. Okay, Michael. And I'm looking out for you, and I'm hoping I can help you in the future with what I'm doing.
Well, I thank you very much for the kind thought here. But I think I've made it very clear what my concerns about cryptocurrency are. And again, we need a currency that has to have a commodity base to stabilize it. One of the reasons our economic system is...
Well, this is one that...
Eric, you did it again.
This is what...
Eric,
yes.
Thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Okay. My concern about the cryptocurrencies is the lack of a commodity base, which means it's going to be chaotic. And it's been up and down and up and down, and I know it's been at incredible highs, but it just does not strike me as a stable currency. And we keep hearing about all these Bitcoin, not the wallets, the exchanges being hacked into. There's been outright fraud. And I don't know. Like I said, I get a smell of tulips about it. And obviously, Eric's a big fan of cryptocurrencies. I'm not. Okay, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And we're going to go back to the phones. Dave from Wilders, Indiana. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. How are you?
I'm fine.
Okay. You know, I don't want to get you off topic too much, but I would like to talk about Bobby Seale.
Okay.
Okay. Have you ever seen the film called Double Crossed with
You mean Barry Seale?
Barry Seale, right?
Okay. No, wait a minute. Yes, I think I did see the movie Double Cross.
Yeah. Now this is a cocaine. This is a movie that Tom Cruise tried to do. He completely botched. But the real truth is what pretty much what you saw, what you'll see on that film.
Well, it was part of the truth. It wasn't all of it. If you want a really good examination of what was going on, there's a book out there called Compromised: Clinton, Bush, and the CIA by Terry Reid. And Terry Reid was one of the pilots who flew these smuggling runs. And it's a big, thick book. It's going to take you a while to get through it. Don't look for it at your local bookstore. You're going to have to order it online. But it is out there. And if you really want to know what was going on down at Mina, you need to look at that. Also, I have a MENA page myself, which you can find by going to the little sub-menu in the gray box at the top.
Yeah, I have a relative that lives in that area, and she has told me quite a bit about what was going on. So it's true.
Yeah,
it's most definitely true, sir.
I've had a lot of people who've contacted me and said, "Yeah, we live around there. There was all this drug running going on, and there was that train deaths incident, which apparently they're trying to bring that one back."
Yeah, well, I was stationed in the Panama Canal Zone in the 72 to 73. I saw some things happening in northern Colombia that only a few people would actually believe would happen to me and a couple of friends of mine. Witnessed some C-23s. C-123s landing, offloading Colombian Army and a CIA advisor. And he just took one look at me and my friend and said, "What are you doing here?" And that, I'm cleaning that up. And we were told immediately, you are going to leave right now. And if it wasn't for him, our heads would have been floating in Medellin Bay.
Yeah, it's a very, very ugly business, and
it goes way back.
Say again?
It goes way back. I'm 65 years old. This happened to me when I was like 19, and I've never forgot it.
Yeah, well, that's why we have a huge drug problem here in the United States of America. I mean, it was just flooding onto the streets like crazy. The reason the United States invaded Panama and captured Noriega was that Noriega was trying to blackmail the Bush family over that Iran-Contra operation because Panama was one of the transit points.
Sure was. And George Bush Sr. was the director of the CIA at the time.
Yes.
There was a lot going on down there. We were 173rd Airborne Brigade. We were detached from what actually went to Vietnam. We were sent there, and maybe someday I'll call you back. I'll tell you what we did.
Okay, that'll be an interesting story.
Yeah, yep. But anyways, thank you for your time, and like I said, I'm a first-time caller, and I'll be calling back.
All right, thanks an awful lot, and we're going to switch over to Jim in Chicago. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Regarding the massacre that's happening right now, I think this is a good time when people need to definitely boycott and isolate Israel until they get their act together, if that ever happens. Also, I was listening to the White House briefing this afternoon, and they blame Hamas 100%. And I was glad to hear some reporters said, what about the fact that they're using live weapons and the Palestinians are using rocks and slingshots? Again, the White House stated they're blaming Hamas 100% regarding what's happening to the people over there, which is beyond ridiculous.
Yeah, it is ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. But what else are they going to say? Yeah, Israel's creating a massacre. Is this a new Amritsar or a new Guernica?
Right. Now, have you heard anything from the UN? Have they spoken out regarding the massacre?
Yeah, I think there was a comment from the Secretary General saying that this was a wholly inappropriate use of force, but it wasn't getting picked up in the corporate media.
Yeah, unfortunately. But again, what do you think can happen though right now besides maybe boycotting Israel, or what? You have an idea of what could happen or should happen?
Well, the very obviously, yeah, boycott all Israel products. Just be careful. We're starting to see more and more states pass laws making that a crime, and like South Carolina. The other thing that you can do, of course, is to just educate people about what's going on and just how ridiculous this whole thing is. We need to start luring people away from corporate media and just open their eyes to the fact that everything corporate media is putting on out there is just total propaganda right now.
I would agree, yeah. And in fact, that was one of, I was talking to a friend of mine this afternoon, and she was not really aware. And I said, look, start listening to certain programs and start doing your own research. Then you might find it. And she said she will start doing that. So I think you're right, though. We have to look at individuals and tell them, you know, put down the corporate newspaper or the corporate TV guide and start listening to people like yourself.
Yeah, and we do need everybody who listens to Republic Broadcasting to act as, well, part of the independent media. You are all now deputized as part of the independent media. Somewhere down the road we'll get badges. And go on out there and just tell people about Republic Broadcasting. Tell people about whatreallyhappened.com. And get the word on out. Get people to start listening to us so we can build a larger audience to educate the people.
Right, and send some money in. So,
yeah.
Well, Michael, I'm going to let you go.
Hello?
Hello?
I guess we lost Jim in Chicago. Okay, let's switch over to Francis in North Carolina. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, aloha to you both.
Aloha snack bar.
Hey, snack bar, ginger ale. It's organic and the natural version, not the synthetic.
I love ginger ale.
Oh, I used to when I was a kid. It was actually legitimate. Go figure. No GMOs at that time. 3 quick points for you. One, those vapor jars you talk about, they are murder on the humidity levels that you have to deal with in everyday life. 2, as far as a state like South Carolina creating a law like that, saying you cannot boycott this or boycott that, excuse me, but they can create all laws they want to in any state. Does not say that someone has to put something in my hand for me to purchase that I don't care to. If I don't want to purchase it, I don't have to. That's my free will. They have an issue with that, they can go take a hike.
Well,
3.
Hang on. Let's deal with these one at a time, okay? First of all, when contrails linger in the sky, that's usually a sign that the humidity is already up. That they're not causing it. If the air is very dry, the contrails from aircraft disappear very, very quickly. If the air is saturated with moisture, then those contrails will last. As far as South Carolina, the law they passed basically equates criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism and says that can be criminalized. If you criticize Israel, if you talk about boycott, divestment, sanctions, you can be arrested for that. That's what South Carolina did. Now, at some point, somebody's going to need to take that to the Supreme Court for a First Amendment challenge.
True. Oh, by the way, one last thought for you. Unfortunately, I had the misfortune of looking at a news channel. I don't know if it was CNN or who knows what my other half had on, and they were talking about the one bus or travel caravan or whatever that Trump had that was going into Israel or whatever. And you know, he has a slogan about America comes first, or put America first.
Yes.
Well, unfortunately, on this vehicle, this presidential vehicle that he had over there, said Israel instead. And I thought, okay, so now he's saying, okay, put Israel first or make it Israel first or whatever the case is. In other words, we now know who has his financial purse strings, who has his noose, who has his guiding mat for his feet to step on. So I think it's pretty clear cut. That dude's been bought and paid for 1,000-fold. Later, folks.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Getting on back to Europe, there is now talk of a possible imminent general election in Great Britain, and Nigel Farage is saying that Theresa May is preparing the ground for another general election, which she could conceivably lose. Now, here's an interesting little story. I've always come on out and said that originally the European Union was all about open internal borders, free trade, free travel, and that was all it was supposed to be, a trade bloc. Well, it turns out I was wrong. And apparently there has been a secret document called FCO 30/1048 that has now been leaked that said that all the way back when the European Union was formed, they knew that they were aiming at total integration, open borders for refugees, economic privations, and this information was hidden from Britain for 30 years. Now, this classified paper dates back to 1971 and recommended the British government keep the British public in the dark about what the European Union membership really meant, figuring that after 30 years, it would be too late to leave. So they missed that one. Back to the phones here. Tony in Puerto Rico. Aloha, Tony. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. I have a quick comment. Adolf Hitler would have won World War II. There wouldn't be no European Union. But that's not my question. My question is this. I was watching a documentary.
Hang on. You know, basically what Brussels is doing to Europe is what Hitler wanted to do to Europe. They're just doing it a different way.
I hear you. Anyway, I was watching a documentary. I was like surfing the internet, and I came upon a document. Well, Richard Belzer was talking about his book, Hitler, that he wrote a couple of years ago, and he stated that he was surprised that in World War II, Hitler declared war on the United States, even though the American bankers were backing him. And but did he have a treaty with Japan?
Yeah, that was the Axis Agreement between Japan, Italy, and Germany.
Well, why would he say he was surprised that the American bankers were financing Hitler? Why would he declare war on the United States? I don't get it.
Well, he had to declare war on the United States following Pearl Harbor because the U.S. declared war on Japan. And at that point, under the terms of the Axis Agreement, Germany had to declare war on the U.S. So the surprise was that Hitler didn't expect Japan to strike Pearl Harbor and didn't expect the U.S. to declare war. Back then, nations kept their treaty obligations.
Okay. Thank you, Mike.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We'll let you go here. Over in Italy, as you... Oh, we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, over in Italy, populists of both the left and right are poised to take power in Italy, forming the first anti-system government in a major Western European state since the Second World War. Now, this is the Radical Five-Star Movement and the Lega Party, and it looks like they're coming together to form a new party that will be anti-Euro and anti-EU. So the backlash is building against all of this empire and unions, regional unions, globalization. Even more interesting is that Italy is going pro-Russia. And that means that Putin will have a valuable new ally right in the heart of Europe. Over in Hungary, Viktor Orban is out there saying, we will build a 21st century Christian democracy, not rebuild a shipwrecked liberal democracy. So the pushback is beginning against everything Soros has been trying to do, shove refugees down our throats. People are getting angry. They're getting upset. They're tired of the costs. They're tired of the wars. They're tired of seeing their homes and culture start to get erased by the influx of all these multicultural groups. They don't want to see that anymore. Now, there was a knife attack in Paris on Saturday, and the man is thought to have been born in Chechnya. Was claimed that he shouted Allah Akbar, and the corporate media obediently is refusing to mention the fact that he was Muslim. Of course, we can't really ask him. He was shot dead by police. But we're seeing that all over Europe. They're deliberately hiding all of the crime being committed by the refugees. Up in Sweden, it's become the rape capital of the world. And most of the rapes are being committed by the refugees. Some of them are actually getting off by telling the judge in the court, I didn't realize it was wrong. It's amazing. Now, over in Santa Clarita, California, we mentioned this on Friday. Santa Clarita is the first city in Los Angeles County to basically take a stand against California's sanctuary state law. They don't want to be part of that anymore. And it was a very fractious meeting. And a lot of people there with Make America Great hats. And it was a 5-0 vote. Absolutely unanimous. They're tired of the illegal immigrants. They're tired of the huge cost to the state. They're tired of the strain on the infrastructure. Remember earlier in the program I said that an economy has to grow to accommodate a surge in population. But if that surge happens too quickly, the economy will break. The same thing applies to infrastructure. Infrastructure should be growing right alongside population growth. But if you have a huge surge in population, the infrastructure can't keep up. California is straining, and they're dealing with skyrocketing crime. They're dealing with MS-13. They're dealing with trash and worse all over the streets and sidewalks. They're dealing with contagious diseases. Now, California just passed a bill that will protect arrested illegal aliens by banning disclosure of their immigration status in court. In other words, when illegal aliens commit a crime, they get taken to court. It is now against the law to mention they're illegal immigrants. This is just so out of control. This is just so out of control. I can understand Orban's comments about we've had it with, liberal democracy. It's not working. And the primary reason for that, as I've said before, liberals live their entire political life in a dream world. They dream of what the world could be if only everybody would do what they say. They're not dealing with what reality is going on in front of their eyes. They don't want to because it would contradict their cherished beliefs. And they just leave the rest of us to have to deal with the mess of their very flawed policies. Now here's a bizarre story. Came out of bigthink.com. Apparently there are 34 states in this country where police officers can legally have sex with detainees. And all the cops have to say is it was consensual. They can arrest a lady, put her in the backseat of the car, have sex with her. Oh yeah, she said yes. And it's perfectly legal for police officers to have sex with people they arrest in 34 states in this country. Got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, all the way back in 1999, NATO basically went in and bombed the heck out of Kosovo, supposedly because there was a massacre of Albanians taking place. That claim was later discredited, and it turned out the real agenda was shifting control of ownership of the Trebka mines and a bunch of other assets in the region. The problem is that NATO was using bombs containing depleted uranium in Yugoslavia. Now, of course, today it's called Serbia, and Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić basically is slamming NATO's bombing campaign and pointing out that childhood cancers in that area have risen dramatically since 1999, because after all, depleted uranium is radioactive. It has a half-life of something like 4 billion years. And the real problem with depleted uranium munitions is when they're still in their metallic state, when it's still a shell or a missile, it can more or less be safely handled. And I say more or less because I had a good friend who'd been a weapons loader for an A-10 tank buster, which used depleted uranium shells, and he succumbed to cancer shortly after he got out of the military. Now, for those of you who don't understand what I mean by depleted uranium, when you are refining weapons-grade uranium, it's a matter of separating two different isotopes, one of which will support continuous fission, the other will not. And the fissionable isotopes go into making nuclear reactors and bombs, and what's left over is called radioactive waste, until you come along and you pour it into a bullet mold or a shell mold and you call it depleted uranium weapons, which is a way of the U.S. making its radioactive waste problem somebody else's radioactive waste problem. When a depleted uranium shell or bomb hits a target, it vaporizes. And all that depleted uranium is no longer in a solid block that you can handle. It's dust, and it's in the ground, and when the wind blows, it travels in the air, and people inhale it. It is truly the gift that keeps on giving. There's really no easy way to clean it all up. And we are seeing these increases in cancers, not to mention significant birth defects, every single place these weapons have been used. Talk about a crime against humanity. Over at there's this information technology guru, Ron Basilian, and he's offered up proof that the CDC knowingly diverted at least $3 million in taxpayer funding to leftist groups that have nothing to do with science. Back in 2014, Representative Karen Bass, a Democratic congresswoman from California, handed a $3 million check to a local group known as the South Los Angeles Healthcare Organizing Project that claims to advocate for improving the health of the poor. And emblazoned on the check as the payer was the CDC. Well, it turns out the South Los Angeles Healthcare Organizing Project is actually a political advocacy group that functions as just another of many thinly veiled Democratic campaign-pushing liberal causes, almost none of which have to do with public health. And the recipient of that $3 million check, also known as Community Coalition, is pushing completely unrelated causes like gun control and racial divide throughout the United States. Now, it is true the CDC is a private company. It's not actually part of the U.S. government. Pardon me. It receives much of its funding from the very pharmaceutical industries it's supposed to be keeping a watch on. CDC itself owns patents for numerous vaccines, which it recommends that you all get, of course. But it does get taxpayer funds from the government, supposedly to deal with healthcare and science. But it's using them to engage in politics. All right, so let's talk about our volcano here on the island. I'm still getting email from people asking, are you okay? Are you okay? Claire and I live on Oahu. We're halfway between the part of the state that's flooded and the part of the state that's on fire. Although I understand over in Kauai, they're getting cleaned up from those horrible floods they had a while ago. Down on the Big Island, things are acting up. It was kind of hoping, pardon me, it was kind of hoped the volcano would be slowing down. But over the weekend, we had 3 new fissures open up. One of them is 1,000 feet long, and it is throwing boulders some 40 feet into the air. And officials are now telling more people, you need to get out, you need to evacuate here. And the U.S. military is on the ground assisting the National Guard and the Red Cross in dealing with this crisis. Most importantly, they have helicopters on standby. Because if you look at a map of the Big Island, there's really only one road out of Hilo that goes down to that part of the island. And if that road gets cut off, then everybody who's still down there is going to be in trouble. They're going to have to be airlifted out. And there are a lot of people who are ignoring the evacuation orders, which I wouldn't agree with. They don't want to leave their homes. They're already out there throwing offerings to Pele. I saw it on the Fox News coverage of the latest lava outbreak, where people are throwing flowers and leis onto the lava to try and appease Pele. And everybody knows you need to use gin. So a lot of people are very concerned. It doesn't look like this eruption is going away anytime soon. It's looking to be larger than the one that buried Kaonohi. And volcanologists are still very, very concerned that the summit of Kilauea is about to have an explosive eruption. They're not sure exactly when. There are actually two competing theories. One is that when the lava descends below the water table and water floods on in, there will be an explosion driven by steam that will put ash and rock into the air. The other concern is that there might actually be a partial obstruction, because what's powering this eruption is a new flow of very hot, what they call young magma coming up from the magma chamber. And it's displacing this older lava from a previous eruption. That's what's actually coming on out over in the East Rift Zone, is lava that's just been sitting under the surface of Hawaii for all these years. And it's sluggish, it's thick, but if the lighter magma starts getting to the surface, you're going to see much more rapid lava flows taking place. Our local state tourism board is sort of concerned that the scary volcano is going to keep people away. And in what I consider to be a rather tacky move, they're running ads now saying, you can still come to Hawaii. I mean, it's perfectly safe. And it is for the most part. But that volcano is one of our strongest tourist attractions, and people do want to see it. People are trying to see it. That is a very dumb and foolish thing to do. This is an active volcano. Think Pompeii, what happened to those people. Right now, they've closed off a lot of the roads there. Only the people who live down there are allowed back in. And now they're actually trying to discourage tourists from going to the entire Big Island because they're starting to run short of water because pipelines have been cut. And now they're saying this eruption could last years. It could last years. Finally, it's been determined that following that 6.9 quake, the entire south flank of Kilauea below the rift actually slid toward the ocean by 2 feet. And that's why we're worried about a chunk of that falling into the ocean and possibly creating a tsunami. Now, I'm seeing articles like this all over the corporate media here about how our volcano is prompting fears of a ring of fire eruption for the West Coast. And there's something that you need to remember. Hawaii is not on the ring of fire. The ring of fire are all these subduction zones and fault lines that run around the Pacific Basin. It's the largest single tectonic plate on Earth. We're sort of kind of toward the middle of that. Hawaii's volcano is not a subduction volcano. It's called a hotspot volcano. Somewhere underneath the ocean floor, there is some additional source of heat. Maybe an extra hot plume that came up from the Earth's mantle. And as the tectonic plate slides to the northwest, this hotspot burns through the ocean floor and pops up volcano after volcano after volcano after volcano, with Kilauea and Loihi being the youngest and Midway Island being pretty much the oldest. All right, let's take a phone call. Charlie in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, immigration and NAFTA a little bit.
Yep.
You know, I'm willing to bet that if you look at the fine print on that NAFTA agreement, that all these Mexicans are legally here. Okay? I don't think all these Mexicans made it here illegally.
Is this a guess on your part, or do you know this for a fact?
Yes, it's a guess.
Okay.
It's a guess, and I'll tell you. Our agricultural imports into their country destroyed all their farms. Okay? Our subsidized corn wiped out the tortilla corn farmer. And look, I can't prove it, but since we've had nobody shipped out of here, nobody's been kicked out. We have all these people claiming sanctuary cities because I think these people know that they're here legally. Because we wiped out all their farmers, and that's a lot of people. They made their way to the border to work in the factories, and then they came over the border here. I think that was the deal, because all our agricultural products came in there and just took over everything. And now the farmers are off the land, and it's now free for the oil companies to do what they want with the land.
Well, again,
you want to think about that.
Okay, Charlie, again, you've started all of this with a guess. And now we know that one of the reasons for the open borders is to basically have the same general population in every country, so they're not constantly scrambling to cross the borders. For globalism to work, for the New World Order to work, every single nation on Earth has to be dragged down to the same common denominator, however low that may be, however third world that may be. And we're already seeing that start to happen in Europe and here in the United States. As far as what NAFTA, we'd have to actually look at the agreement before we start guessing, because guessing is just going to make things worse.
Okay, but I'll say, I'll base it on, what I see. I see nobody has been kicked out of this country. Now, anybody that's been
deported, that's not accurate either.
They've had a charge against crime. But none of these Mexicans have been kicked out.
Charlie, okay, listen to me. That's not accurate to say nobody's been kicked out. They are deporting people, just not enough to counterbalance the influx coming in. Okay?
I think you can count the ones that have been deported since Trump came in. And I'm just saying is, look at that NAFTA agreement, because we did wipe out all their farms. And so, well, thanks for taking my call.
All right. Well, we're going to let you go here. And before we go back to the phones here, one more story about our volcano disaster. We had a caller who called into the show last week and asked about volcano and lava insurance. And I said that's, about as likely as finding earthquake insurance in Southern California. But it actually turns out, following the destruction of the town of Kalapana, the government of Hawaii wanted to basically rebuild and repopulate that part of the island. And so apparently the Hawaii state government offered lava insurance when no private company would. And so now apparently the taxpayers will be on the hook for those lost homes as well. Okay, let's see. Back to the phone. Sherry in Texas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Mike. Listen, I don't want to lose our talk show host guys out there. I'm talking to the Rivero Rangers. Even though I only got 20 minutes of your show today, Mike, I'm not on the air right now. I can't get it right now. I have no clue what you've been talking about except that what you just said just now while I was waiting on the phone. But I want people to know that chemtrails is a subject that no or very few talk show hosts can talk about. It's too hot a subject. Now, I don't know if you know this or not. Sherry, I don't even want your opinion. They value their job.
Sherry, we talk about this all the time. I don't expect a different
answer. I don't expect a different answer. I'm standing up for you, Mike. I don't expect a different answer. I wish people would stop asking you about it.
Okay.
That's all I wanted them to know. They keep asking you about it. You keep getting the same answer. I don't care to give my opinion about it. I don't care for you to give your opinion about it. I don't want to lose you as a talk show host. I want to keep giving to you and Claire. You do very important work. If anything happens, I want to be on your list.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Newsletters, okay? That's all I want to tell people. Quit asking him. No one can answer that question. It's too hot a subject, and I'm just going to put that in there. And thank you, Mike.
All right. Well,
I'll be listening.
All right, Sherry. Thank you very much for the phone call.
A little bit I can get.
Okay. The reason people call into my and every other show with things like the Apollo landings were faked, or there was no plane at the Pentagon, or Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot's love child, is an attempt to make us look like kooks to the general listening public. And it's a propaganda tactic called poisoning the well, and our government has been doing it to the independent media all along. And I'm just as tired of it as Sherry is, which is why I come across as curt when having to answer the same questions over and over and over again. Because the people who are calling him with these questions aren't really interested in an answer. They're here to basically make the show look like it's silly and take us off far more serious topics. Okay, Terry, you're going to be our last call, but we're going to leave you until after the commercial break. Meanwhile, story coming out of, well, actually NASA, and it's called The Big Chill. And the NASA data is now showing that the last 2 years have been the most dramatic 2-year cooling event of the last century. So we are definitely sliding into that Maunder minimum and a new little ice age. And countries are already experiencing crop failures from the cold. We'll be right back. And aloha America, welcome back to our show, last segment of our program today, and we're going to take our last call. Terry in California. Aloha Terry, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, last week I was flipping through the channels and I was going through CNN and they had the news on about something about the Middle East, so I hesitated for a minute. And she says, Northern Israel was attacked by terrorists today up around the Golan Heights area. I said, what? Excuse me. You know, if they say this propaganda long enough, people are going to believe that the Golan Heights is part of Israel.
Well, it isn't. It's still legally part of Syria, and it's illegally occupied by Israel, but Israel's already talking about just annexing it because they don't want to give back all that oil and gas. That's worth money.
No,
You've got to have the money.
Yeah, they'll fight for it. I mean, and the U.S. will help them do it. Anyway, we're almost to the end. I'll let you go, Mike, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Boy, we live in an age of barbarism and piracy, and again, it just feels like the whole world is going crazy sometimes. I actually got an email over the weekend from a very old friend. I mean, as in known him a long time, not that he's old. Just expressing how upsetting it is to see all that's going wrong with the world right now. Because it's not just problems in the United States, it's problems all over. Europe, it does feel like it's coming apart. Whether that's by design or not, I don't know. But I see a lot of very greedy, out of control money addicts just ripping into this planet like it's a carcass. And they just want to make sure they get the biggest and best steaks out of it. Anyway, back to the news. Now, when Crimea voted to leave Ukraine and then voted again to merge with the Russian republics, one of the threats that Ukraine held over Crimea was that all of the land routes to Crimea go through Ukraine. And there was talk of a blockade for a while. And so what Russia did was start to build a bridge across the Kerch Strait, a direct connection from mainland Russia to Crimea. And it's a rail line and pipelines and everything else. It is basically opening as of tomorrow. So good on that one. Over at Project Veritas, boy, they're doing a lot of really, really good work. As you know, last week they came out with a video about the New Jersey Teachers Union leaders basically trying to protect a teacher who was engaged in inappropriate sex with a pupil, and saying, well, there really was no proof, it's just the word of the student. And apparently these union leaders have now been forced to resign, and they're now going to be facing the lawmakers over just what the heck is going on with the teachers union, that you didn't report that this accusation had been made, because it's not up to the union officials to decide if there's proof or not. It's up to the courts. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get out of here. Got to do Jim Goddard up there in Vancouver. Please stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got a lot of wonderful things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, tell all your friends, use email, forget about social media. It's too heavily filtered. Please tell everybody about Republic Broadcasting and whatreallyhappened.com. We need your help to get the word out if we stand any chance of stopping this war from moving forward. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.